Hi Bio30, video lesson 3 of our 17.1 crosses is an easy one today. Keep practicing those dihybrids, and there's some review at the end of this topic, 17.1, some review diploma questions that you should try out and check in with me at the meets if you'd like some review. But here we go. These are two really easy kind of crosses. Incomplete dominance means that neither one of the traits is actually, or the alleles is dominant. So if we're looking at thinking back to tall or short and seeing that tall is dominant over short, that was one kind of scenario. This, when it says incomplete dominance, it means neither one is dominant over the other. Another name for that is intermediate inheritance, because you will end up with an intermediate version of that trait. So these who are kind of equal to each other, one is not dominant over the other, will end up giving us a blend of the two when they get crossed. So when you make a legend for this, it really doesn't matter what letters you use, just that you go back to your legend and know when you get your answer what those offspring actually look like. A good example is the red and white snapdragons. And here, for the snapdragons, what I like to do is just say that we have red snapdragons and white snapdragons, and if they're pure R's or pure W's, they're red or white. But if you get one red and one white gene in there, so for example, this is the red ones if you're going by my legend. These would be the white snapdragons. And if you cross those two, you don't get one or the other, you get a blend. And that's because this mode of inheritance is incomplete dominance or intermediate inheritance. So this one, the genotype would be RW, and it would be a pink one. Now this is just the legend that I wrote up for this question. They were using something else here in the question, but whatever you choose as letters to show that it has to be entirely one letter for the reds, entirely one letters for the whites. If you cross them and get one of each, those would all be that intermediate color. So for this one, instead of using these here, we're just going to see what happens with this kind of a cross using the letters that I chose. If you're doing this, that's your first set of kids are going to have entirely a genotype that would be pink. And that would be your first set of kids for F1. Your F2, remember, is where you cross your F1 offspring. So we're taking one pink one here, one pink one here, and seeing what happens when we cross two of those pinks. So if some one said, I'm going to have a field of pink flowers by just crossing these two pink flowers that I have, he would be in for quite a surprise, because a quarter of them would actually be red. And half of them would be the pink that he was hoping for, but also a quarter of them would be white. So physically, the phenotypic ratio, when you cross two pinks, would be a 1-to-1 ratio of one red, two that would be pink, and one that would be white. So these end up being pretty interesting crosses, these intermediate inheritance crosses, because there is that in-between version of that trait that shows up. And you'll see these in questions as a straight-haired individual crossed with a curly-haired one, and the intermediate is to be wavy. Or in some animals, there's like a brown and a white that are crossed, and you get a tan offspring. So there's that in-between or intermediate inheritance situation. Going ahead to the Cremello horses, you have one like that example on page 25, where Cremello, this cream-colored horse crossed with the chestnut-colored horse gives you this in-between color, which is Palomino, and that's that guy. And so there's another example of intermediate inheritance or incomplete dominance. You can do a question on that. Okay, so sickle cell anemia, not many examples in humans really of incomplete dominance, but they consider sickle cell anemia to be one of those because you can either have a dominance where you don't have it at all. You could have a recessive condition where you have sickle cell anemia, but also there's that in-between situation where if you have, in this case, the normal is the big A, if you're a carrier for sickle cell trait by one of your hemoglobins having the sickle trait on it, so this heterozygous condition, there's something special about that because they are resistant to malaria. They have a heterozygote advantage. So with that resistance to malaria, they consider that a different, I guess, sort of feature to that gene combination. And so you may see examples about this sickle cell trait in the example of incomplete dominance. And you'll see that when you do page 24, you will have a question about that on number 2. And you can give that a try. Okay, and sickle cell anemia, by the way, is when your red blood cells actually are a sickle shape. The issue with that is they don't flow smoothly through your blood vessels. Instead, they lodge up and clump up and can cause little clots, little basically strokes to form because of areas that don't get blood flow to them. And so that's a dangerous condition. There's a issue with the protein that forms the red blood cell. Okay, the only other type of cross we're going to do today is codominance. And if you cooperate, if you have a co-worker, you are working together. And what that means, codominant, when you hear that term, that is when they are both just as dominant. So they both show up somehow. And sometimes if it's colors, it could be that they both of the colors show up in spots. Or in the case of these shorthorn cattle, we've got some that are red in color, some that are white in color, and if you have a cross between a red and a white, the codominance situation where there's a red and white gene ends up with an animal who is roan, and if you walk up to that animal and check out its hair, it actually has both color hairs that show up. So codominant, they both show up. So I wasn't going to use these. I'll just use a simple legend of red color hair, white color hair, and roan is one of each. So the parents here, you can see that one is the red, this one is the white, and this one would be one of each. And as long as you follow your legend and you know what your legend stands for, you know that it's codominant, you will know that these will be the roan animal where both of the colors show up. So the parents here are these. The F1 first set of kids are all roan. And what happens when you cross two roans is when you do that to get your second set of offspring, second filial generation, is kind of fun to see as well that you're going to cross two roans and you don't get a whole herd of roans. You get 1/4 red animals. You get half roans, and you get 1/4 that are white. So you get a 1:1 ratio of red to roan to white for your phenotypic ratio for this codominant cross. So remember, intermediate inheritance, you get the in-between version of that trait, whereas codominant, meaning both of those colors or both of those phenotypes show up. And to wrap up here, this is just a little kind of leading into the next lesson where we talked about how segregation is not dependent on if you have certain traits on chromosome 6s, they will independently segregate and not have anything to do with which direction the ones on chromosome 7 go. So you never know what combination you will get in your gametes, which is why we have to try all the combinations when we do genetic crosses. However, if there are genes that are on the same chromosome, they would potentially be found on showing up together. So if we have chromosome 7 that has both traits that you are looking at, then if you end up getting that one from dad, you're going to get both of those in the offspring. So that kind of throws a wrench into the randomness of the crosses that we're doing, however, it leads to something cool called gene mapping, which we will talk about in our next lesson. And that wraps up our talk on these two kinds of crosses. These are very, very easy. You guys will have no trouble doing the practice on these. Check out my keys and try out those diploma questions that come after.